Joining us is Ned Ryun. Ned is the CEO of Voter Gravity, a national political database technology company. He's also a former presidential writer for George W. Bush. Ned, thanks for being with us. Let's get started.
Absolutely.
Since this news first broke about Facebook's data sharing, it's something I know you know a lot about. Almost 2 weeks ago, the social media giant has lost $80 billion of market share as that hashtag delete Facebook continues to grow in the movement that's far. Zuckerberg seems to be in a lot of trouble here. How much trouble do you think he is in with his pending testimony before Congress?
Well, I think it's a little ironic that we're just focused on Facebook. I know they've been the one in the headlines. But if we really want to have a conversation about privacy, about data, about monopolies, we need to start talking about Google and Amazon as well. And so what I'm hoping that is not only will Facebook be called up, but also Amazon and Google, because I think the thing that people have to understand that are watching is these three entities are pulling in more data every day than the NSA, and they're literally acting outside of really pretty much any federal regulation or oversight. And so when I hear this talk about just Facebook, I'm like, let's have the bigger conversation about these three monopolies that are controlling data and ads and consumer products. And it really they've been created in many ways by our government, by the FTC, who have allowed them to operate without a lot of oversight. And so when people talk about more regulations, though, I always hesitate. I think one of the best approaches will be to have a conversation with all three of these and then bring them under, I think it's the 1984, maybe the 1986 Communications Act, which the telephone companies were put under. And some of those guidelines are you cannot use user data or any of this data. You cannot sell it without express permission from the user. I think there could be some steps that people could take by just putting them simply under that Communications Act from the 1980s.
Yeah, it's a good point you made. Zuckerberg is getting a lot of the attention now, but as I've been pointing out a lot of people now are putting these speakers in their houses, too. Google has their own. Apple has their own. Jeff Bezos is putting speakers in people's houses, and people are talking, and they're listening to everything we're saying, and it's scary a little bit. I'm no fan of Edward Snowden, and as they say, even a broken clock is right twice a day. But Snowden actually did something here that I thought was interesting. He posted on Twitter an old Zuckerberg interview that he did with the BBC back in 2009. And Zuckerberg was asked point blank, are you going to sell or share information on Facebook? Here's what Zuck had to say.
So just to be clear, you're not going to sell or share any of the information on Facebook?
What the terms say is just we're not going to share people's information except for with the people that they've asked for it to be shared. And everyone gets privacy settings, which has always been one of the big differentiators for Facebook. And what makes it a really different service for people is you can say, I want this photo album to go to these people, or I want this note to go to these people. And the privacy controls on Facebook are really unparalleled by anything else.
Andrea, do you have a hard time believing anything Mark Zuckerberg says these days?
Yes, and particularly because this is quite the lefty organization that wasn't dragged before Congress when the Obama administration and the Obama campaign and others were heralded as geniuses for their use of social media and all the data mining that occurred at that point. No, it wasn't until supposedly it was used in favor of Donald Trump and his campaign that suddenly it's a crisis. But I'm glad that my friend Ned brought up the NSA and your mention of Snowden, because immediately I thought about what about the in general privacy rights of Americans and the privacy rights of those Americans that were violated through the use of our FISA courts. If we're going to drag anybody back before Congress, we need to revisit the fact that Americans were spied on by a campaign and a party that went and crafted and paid to have a defamation file used against them to spy on Americans. So we have a data mining and a spying situation and privacy rights of Americans being abused by our government as much, if not more, than social media sites.
Yeah, go ahead, Ned.
Well, no, I mean, but to even lead on from that, too, everything, all these pieces of data, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook, I mean, they're storing everything. I mean, this is what's troubling to me is, again, a conversation about what does privacy look like in the 21st century? Is the entire concept of privacy dead? And then also the thing that's troubling to me about these three major monopolies online, they are in some ways guardians of free speech, but they're unelected. I would argue that they're deeply ignorant as to what freedom of speech and freedom of thought and freedom of opinion actually are, because when you have 20-somethings, and not to be too harsh on some of these millennials that are at these companies, I would argue that some of their intellectual basis for how they operate is not what it should be. And so now all of a sudden, the people that are running these companies, the guardians of free speech, really have no idea what free speech actually looks like. And so I think we need to have Congress pull these guys, all of them, in front and have conversations. Mark, did you actually monetize Facebook data, Amazon, Google? Have those conversations and then go back towards you have to come under oversight and regulations. You cannot use any of this data and monetize it without express permission from the user. Because quite frankly, I think we also have to look at ourselves in the mirror and realize we are actually being used as experiments, data collectors by these three companies, and then have a conversation about how we actually use them moving forward.